Hello and welcome to the program. Russian police have detained more than 500 people, including opposition politician Alexei Navalny, at a protest in Moscow in support of investigative journalist Ivan Golunov. To talk more about the recent developments in Russia, we welcome to the studio today Ilya Ponomarev. He's a former Russian MP who had to leave the country because of politically motivated persecution. Hello, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So first, this is let's go back to the roots of the crisis. This is unprecedented that Putin and the Russian government dropped charges against journalists. How do you explain that?
Well, you see, this whole story was started from an unfair prosecution of a well-known investigative journalist who was investigating some funeral services providers. And that's traditionally a sphere which is very closely associated with mafia, organized crime, and looks like those guys have paid to some corrupt police officers in Moscow. And that made Kremlin not happy, because usually they are the ones who are giving orders to prosecute someone like that. And disrupting this kind of monopoly didn't make them happy. So they decided to actually investigate. The usual enemies of police, which is FSB, the security forces, they intervened. State TV channels actually spoke in favor of this opposition journalist. And as the result, obviously, he was released and cleaned of all charges that were pressed against him. Instead, those police officers who actually tried to arrest him, they were charged.
Were charged. But it doesn't happen a lot in Russia, does it? Usually journalists are either way go through the process.
Usually Kremlin is the first to do something like this, you know. So it's they were not happy that somebody is trying to intervene.
Would you say that it could be potentially kind of a PR move also for Putin, because his popularity is like now at a real low, like 33%, if I'm not wrong, in the last polls. Could it be some sort of boosting popularity move, saying like, okay, we're going to drop charges and then, you know, look like a human president?
No, you see, in general, the situation looks like lose-lose for Putin in this regards. And the reason for that is if he wouldn't do this and the journalists would have stayed in the jail, then there would be more and more protests, and journalists are not happy, media are not happy, and that's always bad. Even in the autocrat and even dictatorship regime, it's still no good when media is against you. But by releasing him, he actually sent a message to society that, yeah, guys, you can do this. You can pressure us, and you can express your solidarity. So he decided that the latter is the lesser evil, and so let's do this. But in general, that's a lose-lose, and that's why I think those police officers would suffer.
Now, I want to go to the topic of the protest themselves. In these protests, there was not only, I wouldn't say it's people from civil society, but also politicians and Russian politicians. I suggest that we listen to a soundbite of one of them yesterday.
We came here to say no to it. Of course, it is a good thing that Ivan Golunov was freed, but it is not a reason for us to relax and return. It is Russia Day today. We have to remind our authorities that Russia does not belong to them. This is not their patrimony. It is our common country.
Now, this idea of we have to remind our authorities that Russia does not belong to them, what's your stance on this rhetoric as against them coming from a Russian politician?
No, obviously, I fully agree with Sergei Mitrokhin, who is my good friend. One of leaders of Yabloko political party, left liberal political party in Russia, one of the oldest political parties. But unfortunately, the reality is very much differs from what we believe should be. And the result that so many people were actually arrested and badly beaten during that rally speaks for itself. And I think that the reason for it is that the police commanders, they said, okay, so we have done something wrong and our friends were arrested, but now we should compensate this by expressing our loyalty to Mr. Putin, and that's why we will be really strict on the protesters. And I think that was the reason why it happened.
Can that kind of police crackdown and police violence can create more political unrest and more protests, some sort of like snowball effects in Russia, do you think? Or will it just stop?
No, unfortunately, I think that Russians have been used to this kind of behavior on behalf of police. So it's not something that never happens. And these 400 people detained is not the maximum number that we saw even within this particular year and the previous years. The numbers were even higher than that. Actually, what I think can really change the situation is the appearance of an alternative. And I think that one of the reasons why the public solidarity campaign in favor of Ivan Golunov, this little-known journalist, because it's known in the closed community.
In Medusa, in a niche of investigative journalism.
Yes, but it's not widely known in the society. But people who never knew about this guy just a week ago, then they were coming out of the streets to say, "We are Ivan Golunov." And why is that? It's because they are looking for a new name. They are looking for a new person to surround themselves around. And this is a warning sign for the opposition that the opposition cannot offer such names. But it's a very positive sign for the country. And it very much reminds me actually about what happened in Ukraine when society got around President Zelensky.
Now, we'll talk about Ukraine a little bit later, but these protests come also in the background of social unrest, say poverty, problem with the pensions. Can this be the snap? Can this be the snap for bigger things here?
I think there will be a lot of things like this. And we don't actually know which one would be the black swan which would actually start moving things. But it looks like those things are happening more and more frequently. And more people are coming out on the streets. Just 1 month ago, we were witnessing also massive rallies in Yekaterinburg, in the capital of Urals region, where people were protesting, guess about what? Against constructing a church. Which usually would be the other way around, right? So, but they were just protesting that they have not been asked whether we want this church in this place or we don't want the church in this place. And again, that speaks for itself. So the situation is changing. The approval ratings for President Putin are plummeting. When this quality would be converted into quantity, we would know.
So would you say that President Vladimir Putin is losing its grip here because there's more and more protests, or is it going to be even harder after?
He's definitely losing.
Yes.
The question how he would compensate for it, and that's why Kremlin right now is increasingly more and more dangerous for all Russia's neighbors. Like Belarus, like Ukraine, like all others, because you know what is the usual method of restoring the approvals is a small victorious war.
So when you have domestic problems, he does wage a war somewhere else.
Absolutely.
That's what he would. Now, and you talked about Ukraine and President Zelensky a little bit earlier. And I guess we will conclude this interview with that. How does Ukraine's growing economy and let's say a real democracy, because Zelensky has been elected in a real democratic process, how can it influence Russia's domestic policy?
The better it is for Ukrainians, the more Putin is in danger. I think that actually the key for his political future actually right now in Kyiv's hands, in Ukrainians' hands. And I very much hope that the new government, which will be in place by the end of summer, and the new president himself, that they would take care of this. And I really like what the new Ukrainian president was saying, that Ukraine would carry the flag, will wave the flag of freedom for citizens of all autocrat states on the territory of a former Soviet Union. Unfortunately, Russia is not alone here. And I think that Ukrainian should be this leader for democratic change.
And we'll hope for that too. Thank you very much for coming in our studio today to talk about this issue, Russian protest and situation in Ukraine.
Thanks for inviting me.
That was Ilya Ponomarev, former Russian MP. Thank you for watching the program and stay tuned for the rest.